is if I monetize houses in Tokyo, no mere mortal can ever afford to buy a house in Tokyo. And that happened back in the 90s, right? Starting in 1990, the Bank of Japan, $1 billion of property in New York, or $1 billion of land in Kansas, or $1 billion of houses in Vancouver don't represent as high a quality property as $1 billion of virtual Bitcoin, because Bitcoin can be moved at the speed of light anywhere on Earth.
Yeah, and you've been championing this by just using the word property more, trying to anchor people on thinking of it as a digital property. Is that what you're trying to do there, to get people to start thinking of it in those terms?
I think that there's three metaphors for Bitcoin, and I think one metaphor is digital property. We're demonetizing the monetary premium in your commercial real estate, your residential real estate, your gold, your silver, your commodities. There's a lot of things that have been monetized, right? I mean, in Canada, they've got the current example where the prime minister thinks the foreigners have monetized all the houses in Canada, so they cost so much that nobody can afford a house. So in the monetary inflationary regime that we've seen for the past who knows how many years, you've seen monetary premiums flow to all sorts of other properties. It's pretty obvious. People monetize Da Vinci's and Picasso's, right? Like artwork has become monetary instruments as well. And the problem with monetizing things with utility value is if I monetize houses in Tokyo, no mere mortal can ever afford to buy a house in Tokyo. And that happened back in the 90s, right? Starting in 1990, the Bank of Japan pumped so much money in the economy that Tokyo real estate was obscene. The same thing happened in New York City where, $10 million will buy you 4,000 square foot apartment. Well, how does somebody making $300,000 a year or $100,000 a year live, right? You've monetized that asset. So there's a problem with monetizing those things. The ideal thing to monetize is an instrument that has no utility value, which is what Bitcoin is. So digital property is the ideal property. It's the most desirable property in space and time. Bitcoin is the dominant digital property network. It's the most secure. It has the most durability. It's the most decentralized. So therefore, if you said to me, where do I put my $1 billion such that any rich person on earth will want it and any rich person in the next 100 years will want it? Bitcoin. If you buy $1 billion of buildings in New York City, billionaires in Beijing can't use them. And when the mayor of New York City enjoins you or impairs you from evicting your tenants or taxes your building, you can't pick it up and move it to Monaco or Singapore. So $1 billion of property in New York, or $1 billion of land in Kansas, or $1 billion of houses in Vancouver don't represent as high a quality property as $1 billion of virtual Bitcoin, because Bitcoin can be moved at the speed of light anywhere on Earth. That's the first check. The second check is if you have to hold it 100 years, a building doesn't have a 100-year lifespan. The Rockefeller Center, or another way to say it, it's got a maintenance charge. You have to reinvest 3 to 5% a year every year for 100 years in order to maintain a building. And even if you do that, name one building in New York City that's 150 years old that's commercially viable today. The useful life of a building, not that great. How about the land underneath the building? Better. Buy blocks of New York City, and that'll be good for a while, but you've got a property tax on it. The property tax, and you've got the risk of seizure by eminent domain. So, and you've got the meddling of the neighborhood zoning board. They can zone your 10 blocks to be low density.
Yeah.
Or they can zone it to be high density, and high density makes it worth $50 million a block, and low density makes it worth $1 million a block. So imagine having the neighborhood, the mayor, the governor, every regulator in the United States, the White House, and Congress all deciding whether or not they will impair your asset. or your property every year for the next 100 years. That's the problem with all these properties.
But could they impair Bitcoin the same way to give it a carry cost? So there's a holding tax that you have to pay every year of 3% in line with property. I mean, that's likely to happen right over time.
The basic principle is this, Raul. Bitcoin is the apex property of the human race. It's the hardest to impair.
Yeah.
It's the hardest to seize. It's the hardest to tax. It's the easiest to move. It's the easiest to keep confidential. You can subdivide it. Take your 10 acres of property in New York City, or your 10 city blocks in New York City. Divide it into 97,000 pieces and then rent it out to 97,000 people that live somewhere outside of New York City every hour. You understand where I'm getting, which is I can oscillate the property at 60 megahertz. I can move it at any frequency. I can subdivide it, in any partition. And if New York wanted to tax it, I can move it to Wyoming or Florida. You see? Yeah, certainly the politicians are going to attack stuff with tax. When you have $1 billion of property in Beverly Hills, and when the governor of California decides to tax it, how are you going to move that to Miami Beach?
You can't.
Right. So my point is not that there won't be taxes and there won't be attempts to tax it. But let's come back to the theory of like stolen cars. A car thief can steal any car. So why do you bother to lock your door? You lock your door because you figure you might as well make your car just like 37 seconds more difficult to steal than the car in front of you or behind you. So they'll steal that car. And I think if you come back to Bitcoin as digital property, you can move it, unlike land. Yeah. How do you move the domicile of Apple headquarters? You've seen the Apple headquarters. That's not moving, right? So you can't move the domicile of a corporation. You can't move a factory. You can't move land in Kansas. You can't move a city block in New York. You can't move the Rockefeller Center. Okay, can you move $1 billion of gold? Theoretically, but practically no, right? It would take you 6 months. Try smuggling $1 billion worth of gold through the airport. It's not easy, maybe in theory, but they can pass a law making it difficult to move the gold. Can you move $1 billion worth of artwork? Well, sort of, but you're dependent upon Sotheby's and Christie's to value the artwork, and it's kind of esoteric. You might get the Crown Prince to buy your artwork, but there are a lot of people in the world that don't really need your artwork. Try subdividing a Picasso by 97,000 into 97,000 pieces, lending it out on the weekend, and then combining again on Monday morning. Not going to happen. So, Bitcoin, I can move it. It's hard to confiscate. It's hard to tax. But let's say, Raul, let's come back to this tax issue. I'm an American citizen, and no state's going to get it. No municipality's going to be able to tax it. Miami taxes my property 2%, or Florida does. I can't move my house, but I can move my Bitcoin out of Florida. But let's say that, you're really focused, right? And Congress passes a law saying every American must pay 2% a year to own Bitcoin.
Wealth tax, yeah.
Okay. Let's get to the extreme. Well, they're going to tax everything else first, right? That wealth tax they've already basically put a property tax on every piece of property in every state in the country. So eventually, let's say they get to that point. And let's say that they combine that with you have to give up your passport, pay an exit tax, and live out of the country for a decade before you can duck that. Okay, fair enough. Right? That was, you kind of got me there. But having said it, I can sell the property. Okay, so if I hold Bitcoin in the U.S. as a U.S. citizen at 2% a year for 50 years, okay, I'm going to pay 100% of the asset value of the Bitcoin. Having said all that, there's a person in Singapore that still will want to own $1 billion of Bitcoin.